I'm Paul Van Squike of Taekwondo Guide, and this is Topic Tuesday. If you're new here, the premise is simple. People leave me comments, they leave me questions, all about Taekwondo, and we talk about it. And this is the only place that I know of where you get regular conversation all about Taekwondo every single Tuesday. So let's jump right in with our first topic, which comes from an exchange I had with a lady in red 9656 who was commenting on my video about how to do roundhouse kicks. And in the video, I say that you should use the top part of the foot, the instep, to hit the target with the roundhouse kick, because in Taekwondo, that's how we teach roundhouse kicks. Now that's a controversial statement in the martial arts world. Does it really matter? No. I mean, the odds of you having to roundhouse kick someone are pretty darn low in terms of in the real world. Does it matter if we use the top part of the foot, the instep, the shin, the ball of the foot? Not really. Guys, just do what you want. But I like to talk about it because we can break down how to think like an engineer, which I think more people should do. It's a valuable thought technology. So let's use this exchange to learn a little bit about how we should think about things in general, not just about in martial arts, and find the real value of asking these questions outside of which part of my foot should I hit the target with, because that really doesn't matter that much for most people. Okay, lady in red says, wouldn't kicking with the top part of your foot risk breaking your toes? To which I replied, hitting with any part of your body risks breaking said part. Lady in red then says, yeah, but the risk is less when you use the bottom of the foot. To which I replied, yes. So, the problem here is people tend to think in binaries about stuff because some overweight baby boomer instructor told them it was supposed to be this way. Then they go, that's right, and everything else is wrong. And I need to push back if I ever hear anything other than what that overweight baby boomer black belt told me. Let's think about it this way. I love my cars. Look at this sweet car shirt I got from the German car show this weekend. BMW, known for performance driving, uses aluminum suspension, whereas many cars use steel suspension. Steel suspension is better from the standpoint of longevity, at least according to many mechanics. Whereas aluminum suspension is lighter and therefore better for performance, which is what the BMW is designed to be all about. Now, obviously, neither of those is better. The real point of it is it depends on what you want to do as a driver. So if you know, for example, you're going to buy a BMW, maybe not buy, let's say you lease a BMW. You know you won't have it for a long duration. You know someone else will deal with the problems down the road. Why should you care what the suspension is made out of? You don't have to deal with any problems. You just want the best possible driving experience. Well, for a buyer like that, aluminum's probably the correct choice. In the case of steel, if you want to drive the car for 300,000 miles, that's probably the way to do it because you want that longevity. So obviously it depends, as I always say. Yes, you do risk hurting the top of your foot if you hit something with it more than the bottom part of your foot. Now, I would say it depends on what kick you're doing, first of all, because if you're doing that ball of the foot roundhouse kick, I've been led to believe that a lot more toes were getting broken with those than instep kicks just because of the way it angles in on the attack. But let's say she was just talking about side kicks in general. Well, obviously a side kick is a completely different tool than a roundhouse kick in that it comes in at a different angle. So the situation dictates the best response. And it's going to vary in every single encounter. So the technique isn't really what's important. It's your ability to respond and adapt to every given situation. That's what a true martial artist should be striving to do with their toolbox, is make their toolbox adaptable so that when any angle, when any opportunity presents itself, they can exploit the opening. Okay, so it's not a binary, it's dependent on the situation. Let's move on to the next topic from Cindy Pearson, 6324, who writes, I like your suggestion of having your students stand with their back leg to the bag and then kick straight back, in reference to perfecting a back kick. This really does simplify the body movement to initially learn the kick, then add the turn. Do you find the heavy bag is an easier target to use when learning roundhouse and side kick than paddles? So this leads beautifully into this question because once again, I must say it depends. If you're talking about performing a technique as described in a textbook, the perfect example of a textbook side kick or roundhouse kick, I would say start the student on a heavy bag, and then you can break down all the pieces and they don't have to worry about all the different variables going on with other targets. This is more like pumse practice, where there's a defined way that you must do the technique. Now, in the case of sparring, it really doesn't matter what the technique looks like. It simply has to be effective for what you want it to do. So, if you're prepping someone for sparring, you may never use a heavy bag. A heavy bag is only a good tool if you have nobody else around to work with. But if you have partners, if you have more than one person in a class, then adding movement, which paddles allows you to do, is going to be a better use of your time, in my opinion, because you can do so much more that replicates the variables that people will see in sparring. And if your goal is to prep them for sparring, again, you don't really care how the kick looks. You care about how well they can adapt to the variables that they might encounter in a given situation. So, I happen to know the way that you're wanting to train people from our prior discussions, and I would say for your purposes, a heavy bag is probably easier than clapper paddles. But for anyone else, it is going to depend on what you're prepping them for. From Proflumin J 5085. I loved this video. I have a question. Can we learn martial arts just from videos alone? I want to learn martial arts, but can't sign up for training. You can and you can't. You can learn to make the shapes that we call martial arts. There's nothing that would stop you from developing the strength and flexibility and coordination to throw a textbook roundhouse kick, a textbook side kick. I say you could probably learn to do forms quite well if you just study videos and perform physical training, particularly if you already have some understanding of how your body works. The right person who knows how to use tools like cameras where you record yourself and give yourself feedback so you can make corrections, can in theory learn to do picture-perfect insert martial art. Especially something like Taekwondo where you have pumse. In theory, you could learn picture-perfect pumse and be a perfectly viable pumse competitor with no instructors. Now, most people are going to find it easier to have an instructor because they need that feedback. But if you have a critical enough eye, if you're smart enough and you use the right tools, you can do it. You can do it. What you can't do, you cannot get the reflexes that you learn from working with partners with your live training. So just as an example, being good at sparring does not come down to your ability to execute a roundhouse kick or your knowledge of sparring strategy. Those things can be a factor, sure, but the primary thing is the learned reactions that your body has absorbed, that you now have unconsciously available, in the same way that if you put your hand on a hot stove, your hand jumps off the stove without you having to think about it. It's a spinal reflex, a primordial reflex. Sparring trains you in the same way, in that you become responsive to things that you're not naturally responsive to intuitively. When someone's kicking at you, you can't think about how to block and protect yourself. It has to happen, to some extent at least, automatically. You must hone your reflexes, in other words. And there is simply no way to do that without practicing with people. At least until we have some sort of holodeck-style virtual reality simulator or something. So you can never get that part unless you have a group to practice with. Now, can you form a group of your own? Sure, you can. You can. And you can do the right kind of live training where you will develop those reflexes. Obviously, a class with an experienced coach will get you there faster because they know exactly what you should be working on, how to best use your time, all those kinds of things. But if you don't have that available, absolutely take it into your own hands. There's really not a whole lot of difference between, how shall I say this? If your ability is to develop reflexes, there's a lot you can get by just working with people. You will eventually start to intuit what they're doing to you. So you don't necessarily need a top-level trainer to get some basic results. How shall I? That's how I'll say it. All right, next we have Urik Deep, I think is how you say this, who writes, "Hi, I'm a Brazilian fan of yours. I have recently come to know your channel and liked it very much, especially Topic Tuesdays. I would like to know, what is your take on the evolution of Taekwondo's Hogu? What do you think about the traditional ones and the electronic ones and its impact on Taekwondo's fight dynamics? Do you know a Canadian initiative, the 2020 Armor, an electronic Hogu that has LEDs and softwares for different modes of training and competition? Thank you, Kansamida." All right, Urik Deep. Check out my video called "The Evolution of Taekwondo History," "The Evolution of Taekwondo Kicking." It goes into this in great detail, and I share my opinions quite thoroughly all about the transition from traditional old-school sparring to electronic sparring, and of course, that involves the change in Hogus. I talk about the bamboo chest protectors, all those kinds of things, and how they influenced the kicks of Taekwondo. I do not talk about the 2020 Armor. I have seen this. The way I understand it, it works kind of like a fighting video game where each character has a health bar, and every time you land a shot, the health bar diminishes. And in the case of the 2020 Armor, the harder you hit it, the more the health bar drops. I don't know exactly how it works for head kicks. I would hope it doesn't incentivize power for head kicks, because I think it's nice that we've moved away more and more from head trauma for something like Taekwondo. My opinion is you should never subject yourself to high chances of getting a concussion if you're not being paid exorbitant amounts of money. Just my opinion, but I don't think it's worthwhile. So the fact that concussions are becoming more and more rare in Taekwondo is something that I personally find to be a good development. So I don't know about that part of 2020 armor. I think it would be interesting to see how it plays out. The reason it was created in the first place is that, at least my understanding, is that people didn't like the aesthetic generated by the alternative type of electronic sparring, the kind that's mainstream right now. And so they wanted to create this different type of electronic gear that would incentivize a different aesthetic, one that would be more appealing to the creators. And what I've said in the past is that I think if you're searching for an aesthetic, a way you want the sport to look, for cool points, so it looks really tough and really hardcore and gets the respect of the combat bros, I think you're trying to do the wrong thing. When you have a sport with narrow parameters on it, be it Taekwondo, boxing, fencing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you're going to get all kinds of unusual circumstances that pop up that don't mimic what someone might term real fighting. That's okay though. Not everybody wants to do something as broad as mixed martial arts. And so, but even mixed martial arts has a lot of stuff that was put in there for aesthetics, like rounds, gloves, and I'll explain. I don't know if you watched the original UFCs, but you'd see people on the ground just stuck in a position for 15 minutes straight. That's not entertaining, so they created the rounds. You'd see people break their hands frequently trying to punch someone, and so it limited how hard they could hit and the frequency of the strikes they could hit with, the number of punches they could hit with. So they gave them padding on their hands so they could hit harder and more frequently. That made the sport of mixed martial arts more entertaining. So my point is, nothing replicates pure combat, and pure combat can be boring too. And so I just think trying to make Taekwondo look the way you want it to look is a waste of time. Make it for the players, not for the audience. The audience doesn't generally care unless they're watching people get hurt. That's what appeals to the masses. So I guess if you want Taekwondo to appeal to the masses in terms of being cool, looking authentic, make someone get hurt in every match. Design it that way. But I think you'll be disappointed no matter how you rejigger it. I think it will develop its own little quirks every single time, no matter what, just like all the other combat sports do. Okay, the next topic comes from ASP9440, who writes, haven't you thought about special prices of the courses for people who live out of the US, or maybe some seasonal discounts? I really want to buy the Pumse course, but as I live in an undeveloped country, due to the exchange, it cost me like 4 times more. Yeah, I didn't know that was an issue, and actually I have only 20% of my viewers are from the US, and most of the others come from what could maybe be termed undeveloped countries. I don't want to use that term too flippantly. But yeah, that's an interesting thought. I didn't really know that was a problem. I'll have to look into that. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. If you don't know, she's talking about my courses on tkdguide.com. I have one on Pumse, one on sparring. Those are my 2 paid courses, and I have a bunch of free stuff up there as well. All right. This is in relation to my recent Aikido sparring round 2 video from Michael T83310, who writes, had a suggestion. What I've seen from you is approaching your Taekwondo skills and Aikido skills in completely separate atmospheres. What I think would be cool is seeing how you merge them. If you were in a self-defense situation in real life, I highly doubt you would shift to either Aikido mode or Taekwondo mode. You would most likely use everything you've learned and what worked best. What would be cool is do these types of situational sparring, but using both your Taekwondo and Aikido skills to practice how you would genuinely protect yourself. By adding more variables to your sparring, you could start to organically figure out where Aikido fits into the picture. So So more, for example, you throw your kicks and strikes at range, but when you're grabbed is when you apply your Aikido. Overall, really loving your content. Just some thoughts, suggestions I had. Yeah, thanks. That's a really interesting question. I've thought about that a ton, like how would you merge these things? But honestly, I think a lot of the founders of these different systems were quite intelligent to package them in the way they did and keep them separate. Because this is a tough one. This is a tough one. So I'm trying to figure out a good way to make this concise. If I'm in self-defense mode, okay, let's put it this way. So Aikido is all about, in the way I train it at least, maintaining a proper amount of space between you and your would-be attacker that you can make an accord with them. So the idea is that you maintain enough space where they can't simply hit you, where they can't simply grab you, and that if they really want to commit to that, they have to rush in such a way where they end up overextending themselves, which allows you to use the blending movements of Aikido to neutralize the attack. This would be true whether they are armed, unarmed. It's always kind of the same approach. You're trying to keep this distance. Now this is totally contradictory to fighting arts where you square off with someone and you stand toe-to-toe with them. You might dodge in and out, but ultimately you're trying to hurt them. In Aikido, you might hurt them, but it's only if they are really committing to hurting you that even becomes a possibility. So the mindset is totally different. Now, I think you can blend a lot of arts quite easily. Like let's say I'm fighting someone and I'm at range and I throw like a roundhouse kick or side kick and it blasts them in the body, and then I move right into a clinch range and now I know some judo and I slam them on the ground with my judo. That's a great fusion of two systems, right? Those are two combat sports. But I can't see where you would put Taekwondo with Aikido. I could see something like judo fitting in well with Aikido, in that if you're trying to keep that space and you totally botch it, which is completely possible, now you're in this tight clinch sort of range. You need some tools to deal with that. Maybe that's a good place to use some judo or Ian Abernethy style karate bunkai training. And that's actually what I do. So I spend a lot of time working on that stuff, which is the close range applications of the movements found in Taekwondo, Tangsudo, karate. So I guess if I was going to try to fuse the two arts, it would be to start with the premise that I'm trying to keep this space. That's like tier 1, layer of defense 1. If they break through that and I fail to keep that space, then I shift into the clinch fighting that's found in this application-based training. That's probably the closest thing I could do. Kicks, you never know. I get, sometimes when I'm doing knife training with people, you try to keep the space, but they get real cagey with you and try to box you into a corner. And occasionally I'll just flick a kick out at their head just to be like, yeah, okay, well, you're boxing me in and I'm going to unexpectedly do something like that. Those are times where you might see something crop up from Taekwondo. But again, generally speaking, I don't think from the standpoint of creating exercises for people to do that they should be stuck together because they're looking to do two entirely different things. But it is something I think about, and I think that's a really interesting question to bring up. So thank you. All right, from Molo Crocs. Hey, you should wear chicken mask, be Sam Duck. I've had so many people ask me to put on a chicken mask. What's going on, guys? Is this some sort of degenerate anime nonsense? A lot of you have anime profiles. Can you tell me what's going on here, guys? I'm not wearing a chicken mask. I don't care how much you offer me. No, I have a price. I'll wear a chicken mask. If somebody offers me $10,000, I will wear a chicken mask. I want the money first. Okay. Last thing. This is at the tail end of someone's comment who was actually saying some nice stuff on one of my videos, but they mentioned coming back to Taekwondo. And they say, besides, I know a Taekwondo class that hands out black belts like candy if I wanted one bad enough. They even have black belt children, implying that having black belt children is a bad thing, or that makes the school an easy school, something like that. If there's any of you listening, guys, please get it out of your head that black belt children matter or are a bad thing. All of the instructors in Asia that I have ever seen, high level instructors, Okinawan karate, Taekwondo, all these like old school masters have classes full of black belt children. In fact, I've heard you can get a black belt faster in Asia typically than in the United States. The people clinging to this no black belt children concept are all has-been baby boomers trying to live out power fantasies through Taekwondo or karate. They don't want a child to have a black belt because it takes away from their combat, prestige, power fantasy nonsense. It doesn't matter what color a belt a child has, guys. That doesn't have anything to do with your capabilities or the quality of the instruction given to you by that particular school. I go on this rant once in a while. I'll keep it short this time. Don't get prestige and status from your rank, like your black belt. Nobody cares if you have a black belt. You want prestige, go win fights. People notice that. They're impressed. You can show them on your phone. Look at me knocking this guy out. Look at me knocking that guy out. I promise they'll be impressed. If you just have a black belt and you go through your one-step sparring with the other baby boomers and you have 5 people in the class and you talk about how your training's too rough for kids and that's why you don't have any kids in your class and nobody's ever gotten a black belt in your system except the guy that you tortured in the woods over a long weekend. That's you and your own psychological problems at play there, right? And nobody cares and nobody thinks you're tough. We want to see you win fights if you think you're tough. I'm not making any claims that I'm tough. I barely had a competition record in sort of a fighting way. I only did it like 12 times, which isn't that much in Taekwondo. And I was about 50-50 in win-loss ratio. I know people who are tough. I've seen them knock out lots of other people. I know black belts who aren't tough. We all do. Nobody cares about the rank. It has no bearing on your ability to hurt other people. Go fight. Get your status that way. All right. Well, hey, as usual, drop some comments for next week's Topic Tuesday. That's what makes these possible. I really appreciate the interaction. And until next time, enjoy your training.